Howdy. I'm Robert McKay. The channel, of course, is Whiskey for Beginners. It's been a while since I was in a small rural Baptist church business meeting, and I just got a wild hair, and I want to pretend that I'm in one. I make a motion back up. I motion we review some whiskey. I second. All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. It doesn't work quite the same with just one person, but since I'm the sole owner and proprietor of Whiskey for Beginners, my way is, on this channel, always the right way. What we're going to review is let me get this where I'm trying to work by looking at the screen and trying to know what you're seeing. That'll do. Old Overholt 114 proof straight rye whiskey. I didn't think to try to look up the mash bill. I seldom do. But it is 114 proof. It is aged 4 years. It also says there 4-year straight rye whiskey. Yeah, it says right there where you can't see it. Thoroughly amateur, remember? That is... I'm trying to remember. I looked up a little bit of the history. I believe that is Abraham Overholt on the label. Now, this is not the original Pennsylvania rye recipe that Abraham Overholt and his family for a long time made. Jim Beam makes it now, and they're using a Kentucky rye recipe which has a lot more corn in it than Pennsylvania did. And this is a review, but I want to give you just a tiny bit of history. Not long after George Washington became president, the first president under the Constitution, in order to try to alleviate the enormous debt the United States were laboring under as a result of the Revolutionary War, Congress passed and President Washington signed an excise tax on liquor, the very first one that had ever existed in the United States. Well, the farmers in western Pennsylvania had been making rye whiskey as long as there had been farmers in western Pennsylvania, and nobody had said aye, yes, or no. They didn't have to have a license to own a still. They didn't have to have a license to make liquor. They didn't have to have a license to sell it. They just took their leftover rye grain and turned it into whiskey, which was easier to transport and brought a higher price than the grain that went into it. Well, these farmers said, no, we're not paying any such tax, and they rose up in arms. Remember, this is just a few years after the Revolution, and there were a lot of folks there who had fought against, among other things, excessive taxation. They rose up, they attacked the tax collector, they burned his house, and for the first and only time in American history, the President of the United States, in his capacity as Commander-in-Chief, led out an armed military force. I think it was like 10,000 men, which in those days was not a trivial number. Today it's, an infantry division or less? But at the time it was a significant force. They went off into Pennsylvania, General Washington at their head. The rebellious farmers knew they couldn't tackle professional soldiers, so they gave up and melted away, but a whole lot of them moved south into the central and southern Appalachians, and to this day that moonshining culture is there, springing from those original Pennsylvania farmers. Now, in Pennsylvania, because of the climate, rye grew best. That's what they made whiskey out of. Down further south, corn grew better than rye, and so that's what they did. They made corn liquor. So that's a little bit of history behind Pennsylvania rye and Abraham Overholt and all this. You can find a ton more online and a lot more organized and without what I'm sure I made factual errors. Let's pour some of this puppy. What's this wee stuff, Kimosabi? Maybe you're pouring along with me, I don't know. I'm still working with this. I may start doing this when I pour, because with this new arrangement that seems like it might work better. And Everlong on the radio, you probably can't hear the Foo Fighters song. And for some reason it just caught my attention just now. Old Overholt, 114 proof rye. I've already coming up on 7 minutes and I ain't even sniffed on it, so let me go ahead and start working on some whiskey for you. And it's 114 proof, so I'm immediately getting a spike of alcohol in my right nostril, which is good mostly just for picking up alcohol. When I go more to the left side, I'm getting the actual aromas now. And it's not a bourbon. In a blind, I might think it is, but knowing it's a rye, I can tell that it's a rye. But it is very rye or a bourbon friendly, or a bourbon nose friendly. And I'm having to be real careful. This nostril's real sensitive tonight. Vanilla, caramel. There is some spiciness in with the sweet stuff. Generally, rye gives me not so much spice as a mineral and a vegetal character, and I'm not really getting that here. But again, it's a very high corn rye. It might be more than 51% rye, but I don't think it's going to be too much more than that, and it might be that barley legal number. As I say, I didn't think to try to look up the mash bill. I don't know about anybody else, an itch can distract me quicker than anything. And it's got what, from various whiskeys I've gotten, and I only know to describe it as a warm note. I've tried for, it's going on 6 years, 6 years? 5 years now. I've been trying to quantify it, to be more specific, and so far I've had no success. There is a little vegetal character there. Well, it's not a very complex nose, and this is only $32.99, a 33-buck 114 proof bottle. So I don't expect a huge amount of complexity. I got it, by the way, on the 27th of April, 2026 at Kelly Liquors. And K.C. Allen, a beautiful bourbon, and I've said this before, but you ought to go subscribe to his channel. He had apparently, if I'm remembering correctly what he said, he apparently had thought this was an Ohio-only release. Maybe there was an Ohio-only edition or expression of this 114, But I've been seeing it here in Albuquerque for a while and wanted to try it and finally got around to doing it. Yeah, I'm not getting anything more on the nose, so let me try the mouthfeel. Whew, all of a sudden it bit me. Alcohol. The mouthfeel is adequate for maybe 100 proof, and I try not to be too critical, but I have had some whiskeys with a mouthfeel so gorgeous I tend to judge everything by them, and this does fall short of those superior whiskeys. But for 100 proof whiskey, it is a nice mouthfeel, maybe even for 105, 110. But the mouthfeel doesn't quite, for me, measure up to 114 proof. Not getting anything new on the nose. It drinks hotter than 114, at least for me tonight. And palates can differ from time to time. I might, if I think on, cut, go back, reset, hit your marks, everybody. I might, if I remember to do it, record a sipping and talking video on the subject of how the same person's palate drinking the same whiskey can give different results. It's not just that every palate is different, but that the same palate can be different. And tonight, this is drinking for me hotter than 114 proof. But at first I could have thought I was drinking a bourbon. And so this is at least somewhat a bourbon drinker's rye. But I was getting cinnamon, I was getting a lot of brown sugar, maybe some butter and honey mixed in. I'm not entirely certain about that. And then come black pepper. Now everybody today just says baking spices, which is meaningless. Do you mean the spices you would use in baking an apple pie? Or the spices you would use in baking beef enchiladas? Both are baking, but it's two different sets of spices. I wish people would be specific. That's just as much a pet peeve with me as saying, oh, that's smooth. What do you mean that's smooth? Be specific. And I realize you can't always. I wasn't earlier with the warm note, but do your best already. Don't be lazy about your notes. But nobody talks about specific peppers. Nobody says black pepper or red pepper or white pepper or green chili or this or that. Baking spices. Okay, you now have left me just as ignorant as I was before. Thank you ever so much. Getting something slightly fruity now on the nose. Candied fruit, maybe. And it's definitely reminded me of the candied fruit on a fruit cake. And not just one of those cheap fruit cakes, but a high-end one. Something from Collins Street Bakery in Corsicana, Texas. I've loved fruit cake my whole life. I can't remember if my mama ever made fruit cake, but I know we ate it. She did make mincemeat pie, which contrary to the name has no meat in it, it's fruit. Now in England they have a mince pie, which if I remember correctly is meat. But last year I had me a fruitcake from the Collins Street Bakery in Corsicana. It was 30 some odd bucks. Worth it. Absolutely worth every penny of it. And I'm kind of getting that candied fruit note now on the nose, which is interesting. I don't recollect ever getting such before. I'm still getting the cinnamon, the brown sugar, maybe the honey and butter mixed in, the black pepper. But right as I begin moving that sip around in my nose, moving it around in my nose, that would feel real nice. Moving it around in my mouth, I got something generically fruity. Now, I'm not getting a lot off of the palate either, and I'm not going to keep sipping on it all night trying to dig out fainter and fainter notes. Pretty soon, in all sincerity, I'll begin imagining notes, and I don't want to do that. I want to give you exactly what I get, nothing more. So this is not complex on the nose. It's not complex, at least not very complex on the nose or the palate. But it's good so far. I like it. And that 114 proof makes up for weaknesses elsewise. Something this simple at 80 proof would be intolerable. At 90 proof it would be okay. Here it's not bad at all. Maybe a little bit of 7-Up? I was thinking maybe a little bit of citrus, and then there seemed to be this 7-Up-y citrusiness. But I'm not sure that this is not my imagination beginning to come in. So let me give you the finish. Some kind of generic fruitiness with a little bit of red pepper and black pepper in there. Now I'm beginning to get cinnamon and brown sugar on the front of my tongue. But it's all fading away pretty quickly. It was never a forceful finish, and it's going quickly. And it's the least complex part of the whiskey, which doesn't surprise me. That's always the case with me. So, summary. This is not the best rye whiskey I've ever had, and I'm not a rye guy, so I have limited experience with rye anyway. But it's not the best I've ever had, but it's not bad. You know, for 33 bucks, this is not bad at all. It might not be worth more than 33, but it's worth the 33 that I did pay. And so I'm going to give this a rating of 5. My Hick rating scale starts at the bottom with 1 and goes up to 8 at the top. I'm going to give it 5, which is good. That's 3.125 stars, 62.5 out of 100, or 6.25 out of 10. I don't know that I'll buy another bottle of this soon. I think the next time I buy a rye, it's going to be either Sagamore Spirit or more probably Hard Truth. There's where you find some good rye, especially if you're a bourbon guy like I am. Those are rye whiskeys, which are definitely rye, but which are not so different from bourbon as to be unpleasantly rye. So eventually, one of these days, I'll probably buy another one of these. And if you haven't tried it and you like rye, or even if you don't, give it a whirl. I'm going to see. Yeah, I have to be able to reach through here to the button. So, I'm a bourbon guy, not a rye guy. I'm not extremely enthusiastic about this particular rye, although it is good, as I said. So let's just go with your standard, here's how.